right. So again, my name is Jessica Toll. I'm one of the assistant city attorneys here at Rio Rancho. These are playing by themselves. I know, there's like a ghost in the machine. Anyway, so our team interacts with PCRs, obviously when something goes terribly wrong, but more often when the PCR is requested by somebody in connection with a lawsuit, either criminal or civil. Sometimes we are helping to prepare you for giving testimony. And now that paramedic Avila has covered the sort of technical components of PCRs, we're going to talk about how to improve your writing more generally for the PCR, but for anything that you write or other forms of communication in general. I'm going to be covering where the PCRs go, how they are used after you guys are done writing them. We're going to talk about the importance of accurate and thorough report writing, and then you'll learn some tools for writing high quality and useful reports. So where do our reports go once you guys sign off on them? They go to the state for data tracking. They are a public record. We are required to keep them for 10 years at least. Even though they are a protected medical record, they can be released with a HIPAA authorization. They can go to the patient, right, who often have billing questions. Sometimes they are going to plaintiff's counsel in a civil lawsuit. They also may be released to Medicare in connection with a claim. They can be subpoenaed for criminal or civil cases. And obviously sometimes they go for case reviews here for training purposes. I feel like most of the ones you guys are covering, you probably don't want to be that guy whose report is used. I don't know how often you get called out for good report writing, but so why is the PCR important? Like, why, of all the things that you guys do, should we care about writing an accurate report? It is the official record of the call and care and treatment of the patient. It documents that care and treatment is used for continuity of care. It's used to justify the decisions that were made and the care and treatment to the patient. It is used by our ambulance teams for getting reimbursed for those. It's going to be used to refresh your recollection before testifying to your actions during the call. Cases move slowly, especially civil cases. It's not unusual that you might be asked to recite what you did during a call that happened 3, 4, 5 years ago. I think Captain Ray did deposition on a call that happened 5 years ago and was asked to recall some very specific information on that. And most importantly, they live forever. Even though we're only required to keep them for 10 years, they can last longer if they are involved in a case, or once they leave our hands, they're out there and you don't have control over where they go. All right, so what do you guys think is accurate depiction of what you do, or totally crazy? All right, so take a few minutes here. Please write a narrative. Like I said, pretend you are lead on the call. Take a few minutes. Write down all the information that you think using that D-chart format. I'll give you guys a few minutes to do that.
There's a lot that was going on with that, so you are more than welcome to use abbreviations or just kind of summarize the treatments and interventions that were performed.
That's me. I'm like, legit. You can't still it. It's just like that way. It's still like, get back at you. Yeah.
I can just write on it.
I put ID.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
We don't like
Check the question.
How many are finished? Raise your hand.
All right, so it looks like most of us are finished. We're gonna come back to these a little bit later. Let's talk about what makes a good report. Obviously, you want it to contain the facts and only the facts, and keep your opinions or your commentary to yourself. This is going to be really important with your impressions about patients, the opinion parts of that can be read into later by somebody in a criminal or civil case. They want to be clear and chronological. Obviously, we want an appropriate amount of detail. Probably not important that you stop for breakfast burrito on the way to the call, but you want to make sure that you're including an appropriate amount of detail so that you can recall that in the future. We want to be thinking about your patient care, but also if there are hints or like little Easter eggs that you want to lay, if this is something that you're going to have to remember in the future. Was it hailing when you got out of the car? Was it like 112 degrees? Was there something specific about that incident that's going to help you to remember it in the future? For car accidents, it's going to be really important to know if the person was restrained, what side of the car they were on, did the airbag deploy, things like that. Keep it concise. Every word in your report should be doing the job. Make it simple to follow. You do want to look at things like proper grammar, punctuation, and spelling. I know this seems like not the most important thing that you guys are out there saving lives. Like, why do I care about spelling things correctly? It's because sometimes this is your first chance and your only chance to communicate your expertise and your experience. If your report is full of errors and sloppy, there will be a presumption that your work is full of errors and is sloppy. Okay, so it is important to do those things. Not get these slides stop going by themselves. And then obviously they want to be timely. Your SOG says that those need to get in fairly quickly, right? You want your report to answer these 6 questions: the who, what, when, where, how, and why. So what are your who's?
Patient.
I want to see your hands. This is the participation part. So what are the who's that you want to know in your report? Yes.
Who gave who's doing the report, who the patient is, who is the patient representative if there's one.
Yep.
Or maybe who's like any patient witnesses.
Okay, so the patient who's giving the call, if there's a representative, witnesses. Anything else?
Who was dispatched.
Who was dispatched to the scene? Yeah, we want to see the engine, right, and the EMS truck. Who the patient is. I know this seems pretty simple, but there are some times where we don't have accurate or full patient information. It makes it incredibly difficult. We can't release a document if it doesn't have the right name on it, right? Because they're signing an authorization for Peter Parker, and if we have a report that says John Doe, we can't turn it over in that example, right? Our billing team needs really accurate information. They have to find that patient, where they are, and work on billing them. So getting those patient details is going to be really important. It's good to know, was this like were a lot of people involved in this, even if you didn't treat them? It's good to know, were there other patients, victims, witnesses, and then just noting if there were other non-patients as well. If you show up and you treat some people, you can note that there was another passenger in the vehicle who refused treatment. What about your what's? What are going to be the what's, the details that you want to make sure that are in your report?
What happened, what you did when you arrived.
What
you did
happened?
for the patient.
Yeah, what you did.
What did you see?
What did you see?
Your assessment should be everything you see.
Yeah, your assessment. This is going to be a lot of those D chart things. What is their chief complaint? What is their medical history? What was your assessment? What was your treatment? Be specific about what you did. Be specific about the things that you didn't do as well. Right, the transport, and if there are any exceptions. What about your whens? What whens do we want to make sure that we're including in there?
Perform treatments.
What's that?
When you perform treatments.
When you perform those treatments? Yep.
Maybe when the patient was having the chief complaint, or when the onset was for it.
Yeah, when that chief complaint, when the onset happened, for sure. Some of your details are going to be auto-populated into your report, but you want to make sure that you're accurate about when you arrived on scene, when you did provide treatment or administer medications or interventions, when you started transport, when you transported the patient or transferred the patient. These are important details, I think, as well for our billing team. Oh, this one doesn't have a animation, so you get to cheat. What about your wheres? Anything other than, here we have listed, where did the incident occur? Where did you find the patient? Was the patient on the floor? Was the patient in the car? Was the patient ejected from the car? And then where the patient ended up is going to be pretty important. Are there any other wheres that you would include in your report?
Like where were bystanders?
Where were bystanders? That's a good one. What about your whys? What kind of whys do we want to make sure that we're communicating and reporting in our reports?
Why we did certain treatments.
Why you did certain treatments? Anything else?
Transport destination.
Why you chose a certain facility to transport to? That is going to be very important. I've seen that come up.
Potentially why you withheld treatment.
Yeah, why you withheld treatment, for sure. But why the patient refused care, I think, or refused transportation. So why was specific care administered? Why was it not? Why was the patient transported? We want to be able to justify our reason for taking them to the hospital. All right, and your hows. What kind of hows do we want in our report?
How did the patient present when you first saw them?
Okay, how the patient presented.
How the patient was moved to the gurney.
Yeah, how the patient was moved to the gurney, right? Did they go on their own? Did they need assistance? Did they walk? Were they carried? Right, how did the patient appear? How was the treatment provided or medication administered? Right, was it intravenous? What size gauge did you use? Things like that are going to be pretty important. How was the patient transferred to the ambulance? I think we covered that. How did the patient respond to the treatment that you provided? Right. We want to be careful that in answering these questions or providing the details in the PCR that we are not putting in our opinions, especially about why you think a patient presented this way, what happened before you arrived, things of that nature. It's really important to only put in the things that you were told, that you observed, or that you did specifically. All right, some general tips for report writing. Write it immediately. Our recollection is not going to improve with time, especially after you start responding to other calls. And then you're like, oh, was that the one that was over here, over there? You're going to start mixing up details. So the sooner that you can write it, the better. Use paragraphs, date and time breaks, short sentences, so it's not just like a block of pure rambling text, that it makes sense, that it's easy to follow. Don't spend too much time on it, but don't spend too little Finish writing it. It's okay before you sign it to take a breath. Wait till you get back from your call, or just take a minute, take a beat, and then go back and reread it, and then you can edit and clarify the details there. It's okay to have a standard starting sentence or paragraph. Sometimes just staring into the blank void is a little bit intimidating, but if you have a nice introduction that you like to say, it's not a bad thing to do. We do caution you caution you when using templates, and I think Paramedic Avila and Captain Ray can detail this a little bit more, but there are some benefits to using some templated language. There's also a lot of pitfalls to doing it, so if you do use a template, make sure you are rereading what it is that you have written down. Use spell check. I believe your software comes with its own spell check. It's also, don't be afraid to use the internet, because again, it's really important that you are communicating to the other people that you are experienced in what you are doing. I still have to look things up. Every time I think I use effect or affect in a report or a presentation, I Google it just to make sure I'm using it right. So it's okay, it's pretty easy to just Google something on your phone if you're unsure about a certain grammar rule or how you're using text. Okay, I want you to go back and look at the narrative that you guys wrote. Think about if you captured all 6 of those basic questions, who, what, when, where, and how. Think about if you capture them in the ways that we discussed, or if there's additional ways, additional things that you captured. How long is your report? Do you think it's sufficiently detailed? It provides enough information that it's going to help you? It's going to help our ambulance team. It's going to help you in 3 to 5 years to remember this call and what you did on this call.
Anybody want to volunteer to read what they wrote?
Great.
Take
Yeah?
a shot. Take a step.
Yeah, come on up here.
So, wrote it in that D chart format. So for D, I ended up filling in information. Engine 3, Rescue 3, responding to a high school aged male, not breathing, unresponsive. Chief complaint, ended up going into chief complaint, 17-year-old male, not breathing, unresponsive. History, I started off with patient representative states patient was playing basketball and went unconscious. Patient witness states patient dropped as if quote-unquote shot. Patient representative did not state medical history, allergies, or current medications. Then I went on to assessment, but upon arrival, patient was unresponsive, not breathing, ANO times 0. Patient airway patent, not breathing, no circulation. Patient's skin was pale, cool. Patient vitals, as stated, I just didn't fill in because I didn't hear the words. Rapid assessment revealed no obvious deformities or injuries. Patient, handwriting is a little funky. That's it. Patient assessment. Let's see, continue. AED was applied to patient. Patient. Let's see. And then from that one on, I kind of got a little jumbled. And then ended up doing the treatments. Skipped on over to apply AED, dropped LMA, and assisted breathing with BVM. IV started, compressions started. ROSC was obtained after AED shock was administered. And then went on down to transported. moved patient to gurney via backboard, transported code 3 to hospital choice via rescue 3 after ROSC was obtained. And then exceptions, that one I just ended up putting in there, that patient representative was the basketball coach, just as a
Yeah.
extra information.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
Just one second.
Yeah.
So I said, for the dispatch, engine 10, rescue 10, dispatch shoot approximately 60-year-old male unresponsive at school at, I just said 12 midnight because we get times. For the chief complaint, I said patient was unresponsive, apneic, and pulseless. History, said patient code states he was playing basketball. Players state he was fighting with another teammate and collapsed. Bystander CPR in progress by coach on scene. Past medical history not obtained due to duress of patient. For the assessment, I said the patient was lying supine on the court at his school. CPR being performed by a school staff member. Pulseless and not breathing. Patient was diaphoretic. Negative visual trauma or bleeding noted to the patient. Initial rhythm on monitor read as asystole. Probably not true, but that's just what it showed. For the treatment, I said CPR was taken over by the EMS crew. Pause CPR for defibrillation. Initial defibrillation attempted by EMS monitored and was not delivered. Second attempt was made, unsuccessful. CPR was restarted. Intubation performed by Jane Doe. I don't know who she was. IV was established in the right AC. Normal saline and Epi-110 administered. 4-lead was placed on the patient. Interpretation by Jane Doe. Pulse check was deemed negative, felt at the carotid. AED arrived on scene and patient was successfully defibrillated. ROSC was achieved on scene at midnight. Jane Doe reports a faint heart rate. Patient was loaded onto a backboard for ease of movement and transferred to the gurney, then taken to the rescue. We don't have much of a transport after that.
Anybody else? We can see how the difference between licensure, right, and how we document. So obviously, we know that a basic writing this report is going to be very different than what a medic is writing. But the importance is, I mean, I think you nailed everything correctly and appropriately. Document everything that occurred, right? Even if you can't document it up to what the medics would typically do, as long as you're providing documentation, that's okay. But that's the point that we're trying to focus on. Thank you both, I appreciate it.
Guys, on that, just one thing to think about too is, and you'll hear it if you ever do a depot prep with us or any kind of trial, if you don't know the answer, it's okay to say I don't know. The answer is I don't know, right? So you guys were filling in information, which is totally good in this context, but like, if you don't have that information and you're gonna put in a report, it's okay to know I didn't get this information, and here's the reason why, right? Because it's important to understand what you have and what you don't have. So if the answer is I don't know or I didn't get that, like that's okay. Just explain why you didn't get it, right? Unavailable to get this. Don't have the exact time because CAD went down. Whatever it might be. If you don't have the information, it's okay to say I don't know because that's the answer. But also when you're writing that report and you're like, oh, I don't have that person's name. Okay, crap. Maybe I should go try to figure out what that person's name is before I finalize the report, right? So like, if you don't have the information, you can't find it. It's okay to say why. But you're documenting that piece of it, right? And then just on that medical, or on the opinion piece of it, one thing we see sometimes, and we'll caution you to stay away from it, is sometimes there's comments in there about like, this isn't an emergency, or there was no urgency behind medical care. Those are the things that'll get you crossed up when someone's reading your report, right? You guys are all emergency responders. Everything you go to is gonna be emergency. If you write your report that says on scene, no apparent injuries, no treatment needed, patient refused, someone's gonna read that and go, okay, was that really emergency? But if you put in your report no emergency, and then 30 minutes later, the person dies of a heart attack, like the idea is we should treat everything like an emergency and just document what you do, what you didn't do, and then it'll be clear if you write the report in a way that you're documenting facts or anything like that, that the call was maybe not as urgent as originally described, but everything you guys go to should be classified as an emergency, and then what you do is based on what you see. Right? So those are the kind of opinions that you want to stay away from, but your impression of a patient is absolutely relevant, right? So that will be your opinion of the patient, right? So don't get that confused a little bit with like your impressions as far as what you're treating, but also the opinions and commentary of, well, I didn't like what, you know, the shirt they were wearing was really ugly. Yeah, stay away from that, right? It's like, like that's the difference.
Okay, I'm gonna kick it to Karen Agavo to talk about some more very PCR specific tips and tricks.
Well, these are just some of the tips and tricks that I've come to find in writing PCRs. Using the patient, the repeat patient tab, like I talked about previously, super helpful tab. It allows you to gain information early on about that patient, so you can start making your early kind of differential diagnoses. You can start thinking of some impressions that might be happening just based alone on what you're getting dispatched to and this patient's past medical history. You can start a working theory of like, all right, what do I think is going on? What are some of the things I'm going to want to start checking first? And it can kind of get those wheels turning. So when you get on scene and you're doing your assessment, you kind of have more of a focused plan of action. And I talked about this earlier as well. When you have your pertinent positives and negatives that pertain to the patient's complaints, this in your chart is going to look as if you have an idea of what you're wanting to assess. You have a working theory of what you think is going on, and you're ruling out these things, right? If they're hypoglycemic, you're doing a VGL to rule these things out. It lets them know that you are a thinking provider and you're not just a robot in there going through the motions. This is the biggest thing to me. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. Right? There's nothing to say that you actually did this treatment if you didn't document it. And that's not going to hold up well if you are sent to court. And they're going to say, well, you didn't document it in here, so it's just your word saying that you did it, but there's nowhere to reflect that it was actually done. Templates can be great, but they also leave you open to a lot of errors, which leaves you open to a lot of liability. If you're using templates, they really need to be reviewed thoroughly. It's easy to copy and paste your template in there. You re-download your CAD and it says your chart's 100%. You didn't edit your template. That's happened before, and people submit a chart with just an empty template full of little blank spots. That doesn't look good on us for our patient care. Templates are great in the fact that you can use them as kind of a guideline. They can tell you what you want in that section. They can kind of guide an assessment. If there's some abdominal pain call you're going to, your template can tell you based on the things you would want done in like an abdominal assessment. But they need to really be reviewed for thorough accuracy. This could also go down to, you said, like I said before, you're transporting to rust, but it shows otherwise you went to SRMC. So making sure that your narrative is matching what you entered. Again, it just leaves you open to a lot of different errors. Some of the common mistakes and issues that we see is going to be adding vitals within your narrative, putting specific numbers and documenting numbers in your vitals that aren't going to reflect the vitals that you actually have entered. So if you're saying, you know, patient had a high blood pressure, well, they can go and look at your vitals and see, well, how high was their blood pressure? But if you're just putting patient's blood pressure was, you know, whatever it was, and then they go look at your vitals, and it doesn't reflect the same, there kind of some discrepancies there as well. So I think it's better there on the side of like patient's oxygen saturation was low. They can go back, look at your set of vitals, and look at your SpO2 in your vitals. 88%, yeah, that's low. It's below normal, right? 94% or above is what we like to see, and they can accurately say that that SpO2 was low. We see in charts that people quote vitals were within normal parameters. Well, what are normal parameters? Right? We need to know normal parameters for each age. Pediatrics have different parameters. Geriatrics have different parameters. So what is a normal parameter for that patient? Are they always hypertensive? is their blood sugar always high? Are they a type 2 diabetic and their blood sugar always lives in like the 250s? That's normal for them. If they drop below 200, they start experiencing symptoms of hypoglycemia, right? So that's would be a normal parameter for them. But putting this in there, saying that they were in normal parameters, again, leaves you open for more liability. Word vomit assessments, another big thing that we see a lot. And this is mostly when people are using templates. They just kind of ramble off all these things that they never actually check. How often are you actually checking CMS in all 4 extremities and checking pedal pulses? How often are you actually palpating all the way down somebody's spine? You said you're checking for deformities, step-offs, crepitus, but did you actually do those things? Because if you didn't, you take them to the hospital, later on they find, oh yeah, they had a deformity to their back. Your chart says that you checked that, but it doesn't reflect on the patient correctly, right? So again, more liability. Your hospital disposition, again, big one, you see it all the time. Make sure your chart reflects accurately where that patient was transported to, who they were turned over to. A lot we see forgetting to add the size of the equipment you used, how much fluids were administered. So some people, they don't want to add all those things in their narrative. They don't want to. It's easier to put an IV was established and where, and then they can go back, look in that tab specifically, they can see what size IV was established, where the location was, how many attempts did it take you, and was that procedure successful. Same with medications, right? They can go back, look in that tab, and see how much of what you administered. This way they're not saying, I administered, in your narrative, you're saying, I administered, sorry. So this way, in your narrative, you're not saying, I administered 50 micrograms of fentanyl, and you go back to your chart and it says you administered 100. So there's discrepancies that can happen there. So say in your narrative that I administered fentanyl for pain. They can go back and look and see, okay, well, how much did they administer, and what route did they administer it in? And this kind of goes along with that, not adding interventions into your procedure tabs is missed a lot. So just because it's in your narrative does not mean you do not need to add it into your interventions tab. They both have to reflect the same thing, right? So if I'm saying I gave a medication in my narrative, or you did a procedure, I applied a cervical collar for neck injury, cervical pain, it needs to be in your procedures tab that you applied a cervical collar. It's kind of that double down of saying you did it, here it's documented. I said I did it, and I documented it. And again, put your name on your reports. That's a big one we also see, right? Always put your name on your report. Yeah, again, it just leaves you open to more errors using templates. Including something not 100% true regarding the patient's vitals. This kind of goes back to saying, they're within normal parameters. So you're saying patient is normal intensive, but their vitals will not reflect the same thing. It's going to make you look like kind of like a lackadaisical provider. You're not accurately documenting what those patient's vitals actually were. Including something you did not physically assess. Again, with the templates, if you didn't do it, don't document it, because you can be held liable for that later. Right? And then, again, forgetting to go back and edit your chart if you're using a template, or just editing your chart in general. Like I said, you should finish your chart in a timely manner, but it is okay to take a break, reflect on the call, make sure you're going back and editing your chart. You're going through each of your tabs, making sure that your tabs are reflecting what's in your narrative. Do we have any questions?
Okay. Not quite yet. Not yet. We're going going to jump into our next session. We're going to get a couple slides in, and then we will take another break. I promise won't keep you guys sitting here for too long. So in our next section, I'll let Ashley introduce herself, but she is has a lot of experience with trials, and so she's going to help to prepare you guys for providing testimony.
Hi everybody, morning.
Morning.
It's nice to see all of your faces. My name is Ashley, like Jessica said. I've been an attorney for like 10 years, which makes me feel really old to say, so I won't repeat that. But I've done a lot of criminal work. I've done a little bit of government liability work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this testimony piece. Have any of you been called to testify in a criminal case?
Subpoena.
Just one? Two? Yeah, what kind of case was it?
It was a state versus the parents of this child for suspected child abuse.
Child abuse? I was gonna say, that's like child abuse, DWI, maybe your homicide if somebody's still alive when you get there, and like an ag bat is probably what you're gonna see on the criminal side. What did you testify in?
Homicide.
A homicide? So they were alive when you got there and you treated them?
They were dead, but due to our, they asked questions about what we saw when we entered, exactly how did we find the patient, how many holes they had, what did we do, why didn't we do anything further, and some statements in regards to what some of the people in the house were saying while we were there.
Wow, so they had you come in to testify about what other people were saying about the homicide itself? That's interesting. That's kind of fun. Did you feel like it was pretty aggressive? Like, were you put
Depends
on
on
the
which
spot?
side was doing the questioning.
So the defense attorney came at you?
Yeah.
Yeah. How about yours? Defense come at you pretty hard?
Thankfully, mine ended at the subpoena interview.
Oh,
they ended
nice.
up appealing.
Okay.
But it was definitely like questions about how did the parents present, what were their actions like, how do you feel like what they were feeling, things of that nature.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's like a really big tool for prosecutors, right? And like defense is going to probably try to discredit you, but you guys are supposed to be, like the cops of course are going to be like biased witnesses, and you guys are supposed to be super neutral, but when you see a dead kid and you know what happened, like it's going to be really hard to insert your opinion. So, talk about some stuff. Is this what we're using?
Yeah.
This one? I heard it's going rogue.
Yeah.
So there's like 3 primary areas where you're going to testify. It's either going to be like third party, like nursing home is suing somebody and you happen to be there, right? Those are going to be probably pretty low key. You might get deposed, you might have to sit down, you might have to give a statement. Those are going to be like not super intense. Shouldn't be anyway. Then we have the ones where the city's on the hook, right? We're getting sued and we got to deal with that. And it might have been your actions that triggered that suit, and that is definitely going to be a lot more intense for you as the witness. Those could probably be pretty hard, and of course if that ever were to come up, we would prep you and we would have those discussions at the outset. And then the third way is going to be in the criminal cases, and like I said, DWI, child abuse, and then the ag-bat homicide stuff. So child abuse is a big one because you're usually the first provider to have eyes on that kid after the incident. Right? So if you have a shaken baby, your testimony is going to be crucial. So I encourage you when we talk about report writing to make sure that you're documenting. If you feel like this is probably something I'm going to have to testify about, or this kid is circling the drain, or this drug person keeps like spouting off these really weird statements, make sure you're documenting it in your report. Alright, so in civil cases, we have a dispute between 2 private parties. Like I said, it could either be a person in the city or 2 other people involved. The standard is preponderance of evidence standard, so it's a fairly low burden, fairly low level of proof in civil cases. And in criminal cases, of course, we'll see in a second, but we have beyond a reasonable doubt. We're going to see a lot of personal injury, wrongful death, car crashes. I'm just sure you guys would get subpoenaed to testify in car crashes at some point. And then the issue is usually, almost always, it's going to be money, right? Okay. These usually, like I say plea out, these usually come to some kind of agreement before we have to do a jury trial on the civil side. We don't see a lot of civil jury trials. Especially at this level, like on a municipal level, we're not going to see a ton of jury trials. So it's going to be fairly uncommon on the civil side. Criminal, of course, is a crime. The state brings charges against a person. The standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the highest standard, and like you can hear defense attorneys give their big spiel about what beyond a reasonable doubt means, but it's a fairly high burden, right? The state has to prove a lot. We need a lot of evidence, and fortunately or unfortunately for you guys are subject and privy to a lot of the evidence that at the outset of that crime, because you're there at the scene and you're one of the first people there. DWI, fatal crashes, child abuse, domestic abuse, and then the stakes, it's not going to be monetary, it's going to be jail time for the person who did it. So you're highly likely to end up in front of a jury in a lot of cases, especially involving those higher charges where somebody's potentially going to go away for a long time. That usually is a jury trial, but you might get your case pled out at the PTI stage, pretrial interview stage, and then you won't have to see a jury. So on the testimony side, on a deposition, so on the criminal side, you're going to do a PTI, which is like an interview. Usually the DA is there, the DA investigator is there, and then the defense attorney wants to ask you questions about what you saw so that they are put on notice about what you might testify to at the trial. A deposition is kind of analogous in the civil context, so it's a little bit more formalized. There's a court reporter there, there's a video person there, there's rules there, but the judge isn't there. So it's an opportunity for parties in a civil suit to obtain testimony from a witness. You are under oath prior to trial. It is part of discovery. They are gathering facts and information so they can be better prepared for trial. It can be, I've never seen a Zoom deposition, but usually it's in person and it's usually in like an informal setting. Everyone that I've ever done has been like in a conference room. Both sides will ask you questions and then we'll have a transcript from it. So if you do a deposition, make sure you get a copy of that transcript, because I would hate for you to be put in a position where you do your deposition when you're super tired, you're just coming off a shift, you maybe are scrambled, you have a new baby, you were up all night, whatever it is, you do your deposition, you say something, and then you get to trial and you're like, say something totally different, they're going to have a field day with you. They're going to hem you up for what you said, well, you said this on this day, and it's just not going to be pleasant. So make sure you have a transcript, get a copy of your deposition so that you can reflect back on it, and if your testimony does need to change because it isn't accurate or you're remembering it differently, then you also have an opportunity to kind of prepare that, like, hey, look, I need to correct this, I said this way, and it will limit those attacks that they will try to make on your credibility. You're being asked to testify because you're a witness, right? You are a first responder, you are one of the first at the scene, you have a ton of information, and all of the information that you have isn't preserved for us at the litigation stage, right? We walk into the courtroom and we present the facts, but you guys were there for all of the facts. You guys were there, you are the witness for the jury, for the judge, whoever it is, you have to present all of that information because you were the one that was actually there. So your role is really crucial in any kind of testimony because you have that information that other people don't have. One of the things too is with your specialized knowledge, and we have to remind like doctors and stuff like that, like, hey, we know that you have all of this like super high speed medical terminology. I can tell you, I can maybe spout off the difference between like proximal and distal, but that's about it. Like that's where I draw the line. So when it comes to like medical terminology, try to kind of temper that and pretend like you are talking to fifth graders, whether it's a defense attorney who probably doesn't have a ton of medical background, or a judge, or whatever it is, even us, we're probably gonna like deer in the headlights you when you first start spouting off a lot of information because we don't know all of those things. So try to temper your technical knowledge. It sounds great, but be ready to explain it. I know juries like the high-speed technical when they hear people start spouting this off, but then be ready on the back end to explain what all of that means. So when you're being asked to testify, you'll be asked about processes, rules. You might be asked about your policy, if there was some kind of policy violation, or if they're relying on a reason why you did what you did. Policy might be drug into it, so be ready for that. You're going to talk about your background and experience. Usually more experience means more credibility, generally speaking. You're going to be asked how you prepared for the deposition, and if that means that we sat down with you and we prepped you for your deposition, don't hesitate to say that, right? We don't wanna hide the ball at all. We don't wanna kind of be shady about our answers. Yeah, I prepared with the attorneys and I was asked a series of questions and told what might come up today. Like, it's okay to say all of that. And then of course, the obvious one is gonna be the detail of the incident. So you can review your report when you're at a deposition, you can have your report there. When you go to testify, depending on whether or not like it's a suppression hearing, you usually can't have your report in front of you. So keep that in mind. The prosecutor should have a copy of your report and they'll be ready to go. And if you say, I don't remember, they'll be like, ask you a really dumb question, super dumb. Is there something that might help you refresh your memory? Because we can't lead you, right? We can't offer the answer. We can't say, hey, do you want to look at your report real quick? Like, that's like, oh, objection, objection, it gets crazy. We have to ask you this broad question and then you can be like, can I look at my report? It's like, oh, I have to have a copy of that because, you know, we prepared this way in advance. But you can review your report. Know your training history. Like, a lot of times that helps build credibility. I did this, I did that. Like, I know it might sound like a long list, especially for those people who have been here for a long time. But fact finders will give you more credibility when they hear, like, they've done all this training and they've been doing this for a really, really long time and they've done this and worked here in this specialty or whatever. Like, even your internship years, all of this stuff that you've done, be prepared to talk about it because when we put you on the stand, we want you to look like the best possible person, the best possible witness that you can. Again, knowing policy and procedure, that's really hard, right? Because policy is usually like this thick and you know, there's no way anybody is ever going to keep all of that in their head. But try to think of some policies that are in play, the most common ones about that govern why you do what you do, right? Not these like super nuanced ones, you don't have to start storing those in your head, but if it was a unique incident, try to think of all of the policies that were in play at that time and review those. Like, don't hesitate to review before any kind of deposition or statement that you have to give. Pausing before you answer. So, like, the best thing as an attorney, as a prosecutor, when I would ask a question that I knew I was getting an objection, I would ask the question and hope that you would answer it really, really quickly, because then the answer would come out and the jury would hear it before defense ever had an opportunity to object. Technically speaking, you're kind of supposed to give pause, especially when defense is asking you questions, or the opposing attorney is asking you questions. Pause. Because then we have to like get our objections in order and like we stand up and we have to know what we're gonna say. So give us a second to make sure, especially if you're like, this isn't checking the gut test. I don't know, this question feels really weird. Like, you can make some eye contact and be like, should I answer? And if you see us standing up, don't say anything. If you see any attorney standing up, just don't say anything because it's gonna be an objection and you have to fight that out amongst yourselves. That also gives you an opportunity to think about the question and your answer. I've had, cops get up on the stand and they're like, hold on. And sure, it's like some awkward silence where you're just like, all right, think about it. And I'm a pretty like impatient person and I'm like, all right, I don't want to like lay the pressure on you, but what are we doing here? Do you need to look at your report? Like, what are we doing? But don't hesitate. Like, if you really need to work through something and you're like, I'm not sure, it was a chaotic night, I don't know what happened, we moved the kid, we didn't move the kid, we were in the house, we were outside the house, like, don't hesitate. Hey, I need to take a second, let me think about that, hold on. And you can work through that. Oh, where'd it go? So you want to make sure you're truthful, like Josh talked about the I don't knows. Like, if you don't know, you don't know. But if you start making stuff up, we're going to pull up that deposition transcript or we're going to pull up your partner's report and we're going to be like, but that's not what happened. And the last thing you want as any kind of government employee is to be painted as a liar. Like, we don't want that. And it could be totally inadvertent, like I said. You could have been super tired or super stressed or whatever was going on in your personal life to where you were a little bit scattered and then you kind of make up this answer. Of course they're going to sink their teeth into that and they're going to hold on to it like a little pit bull and they're going to be like, nope, but you said, but you said, but you said. And you're like, yeah, I know, but like, it's really, really hard to walk stuff back when you've already made a statement that's on the record somewhere. So be really, really careful with that. If you're like, I don't know, I need to look at my report, or I don't really remember, hopefully your report will refresh your memory. But just make sure that you don't say anything that you might have to walk back later. Make sure you agree with every statement in the question before you answer. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you to get argumentative with defense attorneys, but if they're trying to hem you up and you're like, no, like, stand your ground. Don't hesitate to be like, that question is a multiple faceted answer. Like, I need to break this down. Don't hesitate to push back, because it's all a dog and pony show in a courtroom, obviously, right? They're trying to sway the jury, or they're trying to sway the judge on any kind of like civil suit, and you're in a position where you know the facts better than anyone. So if you're like kind of feeling pressured to give an answer, don't hesitate to push back. You can obviously do it in a respectful way and say, you know what, hold on, that question isn't making sense. Can you ask it a different way? Or, I don't agree with the way you asked this question. It's not a yes or no question. Don't hesitate to do that. I know it can be a really intimidating experience, but at the end of the day, we really want your credibility to shine through. So make sure that you agree with every statement and every question that is presented to you. And if you need to push back, don't hesitate to do that. This is my favorite. So some people get on stand and they're very, very, very chatty. Like, they're like, yeah. And then this one time we saw this other guy at this same place and then they go off into a tangent. And all that does is open your statement up to be picked at more, right? So try to keep it really, really concise, unless we've prepped you ahead of time and we're like, hey, we need to talk about this and this is how I'm gonna ask this question. I would like you to expand at this point on whatever your testimony is, right? So don't start volunteering stuff. Like, I'm not saying not to like, keep secrets. I'm saying if they ask you about situation A, don't start going into all of these different tangents. It'll waste time, you'll lose your focus, it'll open you up to potentially more cross-examination, and defense will turn their focus, and it could just become this big bear. So I know it's really hard to, like, when you're nervous, chatting, and you're like, yeah, well, okay, let me tell you this, and then you start talking really fast. It's really, really easy to fall into that. I do that myself, so just be really, really cautious of keeping it focused. And then don't guess. Like we said, like, if you're not sure or you need to review something, the most we could do on our side if we are in a formal hearing is there's something that might refresh your memory. That's what we'll ask you. And have something ready to go. And if you're like, no, I just don't know, okay, well, don't guess. Like I said, it will open up some pretty nasty doors if you start like speculating as to what you thought you might have done. And I know it's hard. A lot of you work at night. We all have personal lives, we all have our own stuff, and testifying is no joke. Like, it is a really, really difficult thing. So, if you ever end up on like a third-party case where, like, you know, the city isn't involved, or on a criminal case, if you ever end up subpoenaed and you're like, hey, can we talk about some potential cross questions? Like, I'm happy to do that. I know Josh is happy to do that. I'm sure Jessica's happy to help with that. So we can always help. Like, let's just run through it so that you feel more comfortable and confident going into it, and so that you look like the best witness that you can possibly be. Happy to help anytime. All you have to do is send an email. We'll pull the criminal complaint, we'll look at it, and then we'll see, you know, what's going on. So.
On that, if you guys ever do get a subpoena for anything related to anything to do with the city, we're your lawyers when it comes to things you do with the city, right? It's in the course of your employment. We enjoy attorney-client privilege with you. Please do not show up to court without telling us, because nothing good will happen with that. We want to be aware. Often it's car accident, nothing to do with us, but they want to talk to you guys because you guys have something. You guys saw something. Cool. We will still go to the deposition with you. We will talk with you about it beforehand. We will organize with the counsel if they want to talk to you before the deposition. We will also help schedule the deposition based on your availability. So we are your lawyers. Please come talk to us early. Talk to us often if you guys get contacted by lawyers, or especially if you get subpoenaed. And yeah, as far as the testimony goes, you might be witnesses. One of the, my previous life when I was a prosecutor down in Albuquerque, did a lot of child abuse stuff, and you all are incredibly integral witnesses as far as like proving a case. But you also have impacts as far as the outcome of cases. So I had a case where basic facts were mom and dad in a hotel room, call for baby unresponsive. Well, the dad later admitted, and EMS treated the baby, ran to the hospital. Dad later admitted that he headbutted the child. Severe brain bleeding, detached retinas, like baby coded on the way to the hospital, was resuscitated. Baby ended up living. Dad and mom, though, are the defendants in this case, right? Baby has no advocate for them when you're talking about how to sentence somebody, when you're trying to make a case. It all comes in through treating paramedics, detectives who run the case, and then if the person actually admits to it, which in this case he did, so we actually reached a plea before we went to trial. So there wasn't any testimony, but what ended up happening was the EMT who wrote the primary report, I remember because I read it and I go, wow, this is different than a lot of different reports, right? It was a very well-written report, very extensive. So I called them and said, hey, we have this thing called victim impact statements or impact statements, and it allows the judge to hear from people who are involved in the case at sentencing. It's a lot broader. The judge can listen to whatever they have to say. And I said, hey, will you come talk at this sentencing? Because 0 to 15 years on this guy. And I can make all the arguments I want. We have the child abuse experts, and they hear from them all the time. He's like, yes, absolutely. Comes in, gives one of the more impactful statements I've ever heard in my career. Judge ends up putting, this guy had no history, he's pretty young, puts him in prison for 8 years. Okay, cool. Here's what ended up happening later, and this is why it matters what you guys say and why you want to be prepared. A month later, they file a motion to reconsider. EMT's unavailable. Okay, I don't need him. He already said what he said to the judge. How can the judge forget that? Nope. Judge reconsider the sentence and change it down to 2 years. So like what you guys say in court matters, and what you say has to match up with your report. Because if they start punching credibility, right, even if you did everything right, if your report has misspellings, it has stuff in there you didn't do, or it has things, it's missing stuff that you did do, you start to look less credible, and your testimony carries a lot of weight. So like, don't push off the report because you think it doesn't matter, because you never know when it is going to matter. So think about that when you're writing reports, right? Patient care first and primary, absolutely. But the pen, the keyboard is also a huge piece of your job, right? Because it tells people what you did. You guys do a good job, and it's important what you do. You want it to reflect so that you can carry that weight with your testimony. So don't disregard the paperwork. Even though none of you in this room probably signed up for the job because you like paperwork, I hate it also, and I don't know why I'm a lawyer, but it's an important piece of the job.
So we are going to do some mock depositions. So I'm going to need